Good morning. What a powerful reading this is. I was realizing yesterday that probably for the last 3 or 4 years, I've given a talk on this particular reading somewhere. So I said to myself, see what you can learn that's new today. As I read it yesterday, it's really quite a story. Maybe in some ways it's not surprising that I've been handed this talk so often because I came in this lifetime into a Jewish family. I was born and raised Jewish. And while I was very involved in Judaism, in the love and the heart of it, mostly through the music of it, I always felt a little out of sync with it because the Jewish people just tend to be a very intellectual people. Even to this day, it's actually rather remarkable. I know it's silly in some ways to try and talk about a whole people, but it's simply true. They love to learn. They're, as a whole, a highly educated people and really move a lot from their heads. And I think I must have come into this incarnation sort of like this, like, okay, I'm here this time and I'm Jewish, but please get me on to the next yuga, get me out of this intellect and into feeling in my heart. And I've always just felt that way. So somehow those roots go very deep. But what happened for me as I read the reading this time is that I developed a kind of compassion for the Jewish people. This reading, I've often glossed over the beginning, like, oh, they were just being so intellectual and they really couldn't understand what Jesus was trying to bring them. I've never quite said it like that, but I would feel some of that. But I really started thinking about the history of what happened to the Jewish people, which is completely relevant to understand what was happening by the time Jesus came to them. They had been in bondage, in slavery, for centuries. I mean, they were slaves to the Greeks, to the Egyptians. In some ways, they were even slaves to the Romans, but for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think probably from a deep soul call, their longing to be saved, Moses had appeared to them. And the reason I say I feel that is because really God can only come to us when we're ready, when we're open. It is only from that place of that deep longing and soul call that the divine will even descend, if you will, and come to us, come into our lives. We say it in several ways as we read our festival all the time. A voice of love went up and you responded. We talk about responding to the aspiring call of souls everywhere. That's when God can come to us. So from that place of slavery, Moses came to the Jews, and they were freed when Moses came. But they had been living as slaves, literally being told moment by moment what to do, when to do it, how to do it. For centuries, they had no idea really how to go about living their lives. They needed laws and rules. They needed a sense of order that was for them, not necessarily for the people who had enslaved them. And Moses came, and in essence, he brought to them what we call Mosaic law, and of course the 10 Commandments. Now, it didn't escape me that the first commandment is, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. So speaking right to the Jewish people at that time, God is saying to them, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. Right away, the message is there. And over time, even when Jesus was asked, what is the most important commandment? He repeated, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. He repeated the whole first commandment. So the message was coming to these people. It's really about your heart. But along with those commandments, and particularly that first commandment, came 600 or 700 laws. So one can see that it might have gotten a little forgotten. It was easy to grab onto the laws in some ways. They were meaningful because they help us remember. It's not, a law such as don't walk into your house without touching and kissing the Torah that we'll put on your not your doorstep, but your door post, thank you, is not because the Torah needs to be touched or loved. It's because we need to remember every time we do that we're entering the house of God. It doesn't matter what house we're entering. So we need to remember God lives here. Everyone who's in this house is a manifestation of God. And the laws are really, in some ways, all like that. Even the commandments, when we look at them, the Swami says, when you read the commandment, thou shalt not kill, he said you're really remembering that God is in everyone. Or it could trigger your memory to remember that. When you're being told, thou shalt not steal, you're coming to a place of peacefulness within yourself. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Don't lie. It's, in essence, the deeper meaning is saying, come out of delusion. Take a look at what's right here. Deal with what you see in front of you. Don't make it something other than it is. So these laws had meaning. They particularly had meaning to a people who needed to collect themselves, who needed to get themselves in order, who really needed something more than just love the Lord thy God. They needed to figure out ways to live. They were given laws about what to eat, when to turn on a light, when they could walk, when they couldn't walk. And it's easy to see how in their next soul call, when they realized sometime later that they were going astray, their lives started taking a wrong turn. They were really a God-loving people, in essence, because they chose God over and over. And again, very much like we say in the festival all the time, God's chosen people have always been those of every race and nation who with deep love chose him. And the Jews did that. They were able to call to themselves twice true avatars. Master said that Moses was an avatar. He related his experiences in the Bible, the serpent, climbing up the serpent and the burning bush and going up onto the mountain. He said these are all indications he went up to God, meaning, inwardly really, meaning he was able to receive divine inspiration, to receive those 10 commandments. So he was an avatar. So this is twice now that these people were able to call true avatars to them. But I was thinking, what would it feel like to those people when Jesus appears and Jesus saying to them, look, you're looking outside for everything. Everything's becoming much more material. You're living these laws, but you're living them almost mindlessly. Now you've become attached, even if it's to beautiful synagogues or to these gorgeous robes, and you're giving your teachers all of this money. You don't need any of that. Everything you need is inside. Well, that must have been a very hard message to swallow. I could imagine the Jews saying to themselves, I don't think so. We just got a hold of all this. We're not giving it up so easily. And you could see how that would feel. I mean, when you realize that even Arjuna in the Gita didn't want to let go of all that he had drawn to himself, all of his habits, his likes, his dislikes, which were, of course, represented by his thousands of cousins. But even Arjuna, sitting there in the presence of God, was saying to God, he was bargaining with him, right? Can I just keep a little of this and I'll hold on to them, but I won't totally pay attention over there. I'll really try and pay attention to you, but I don't want to have to let go of this or kill this. And I realize that even Arjuna is saying that. How would the Jews have been able to react to Jesus basically coming and saying, everything you want now has to be from the heart. Everything that you want. Jesus brought truth and grace. Grace being the power to know God, and truth being the inner experience of the divine. Basically, he came to bring this refinement of love to the Jewish people. Once again, saying, go into your heart. This is where you need to be. This is where you will find everything you say that you want. And he said to them, I am telling you, it is about divine love. And in his own way, found ways to deliver this beautiful message. He said, it's about love, which is above the law. Love will prevail. We find more truth in love. It supports the law. Love will always support God's law. But really, divine love is the purpose for the law. He was saying to these people, don't mistake the path for your goal. Don't get lost here. What you want is not in these laws to the exclusion of opening your heart. You remember he said to them, Sabbath was made for the man, not man for the Sabbath. When they were complaining that a farmer was harvesting, I think it was, on the Sabbath. There is no law that is not here to support you spiritually. But can you now rise above the law and get into the heart and soul of all of this with me? Now, fortunately or unfortunately, many of the Jewish people couldn't do that. Of course, there were some who could. Those became his disciples and ultimately went on to become all of what we now know as Christianity and all of its various forms. But the Jews simply were not able to hear that Jesus was coming not just to free them from slavery, from the physical bondage. He was coming to free them from all of delusion. He was saying to them, this is all about what your soul needs. It's not about what your ego needs. As soon as I was thinking that yesterday, I thought, really, we could think ourselves of all of the ways that we're enslaved. It's the same thing. Anything that we're living for in terms of our ego may as well be considered slavery. It's exactly what it is. It keeps us contracted. It keeps us in a much smaller place than we ever could imagine being. Were we to open ourselves fully, that is, to expand into this superconscious state, which means being one with God, which means being in love. I just read the most amazing book in the last few days. Stephen quoted from it in a class that we taught together on Tuesday night, and so I got the book. It's called Talks with the Great Composers. And it was so extraordinarily powerful. It's part of why I have this here, because I want to be able to read you the author of this book, I think his first name was Abel, A-B-E-L-L. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, he was an American, but he lived in Europe. And he wanted to speak to a lot of the great composers to find out what spirituality, really this was the purpose, what does spirituality have to do with the way that you compose? And he had been, of course, listening, this was after Beethoven now, but it was in the time of Brahms and Haydn and many others, and he had heard Brahms in particular make comments that his music didn't come from him, that it came from the source of all power, is really how he ultimately put it. And for years, this Mr. Abel went to Brahms and said, would you share this with me? Will you tell me, how does this music come to you? But he wouldn't. And finally, after this man just kept coming back and kept coming back, he had all of these conversations with Brahms. The whole book, and other composers, it is so compelling. I literally couldn't put it down. But the conversation with Brahms was so remarkable because he first made him make the promise that he wouldn't publish anything he said until 50 years after he died. He said, my music will not really have its solid place for at least 50 years after I die, so I don't want any of this to get out there. But what you realize when you read these conversations is just how trained in the classics these people were. Here was Brahms. He was, one of the genius composers. But he could quote everything in literature till that time. Didn't matter what it was. It could be Milton, Shakespeare, poets, any poet. He could quote the Bible. You could ask him about any part of the Bible. He could quote it back and give you a talk on it. It was very uplifting reading it. But when this man said to him, Dr. Brahms, he said, how do you contact what you call this omnipotence? He called it the omnipotence. He said, how do you contact it? And he said, this is a great question, Brahms says. It cannot be done merely by willpower, working through the conscious mind, which is an evolutionary product of the physical realm and perishes with the body. It can only be accomplished by the soul powers within. These powers are quiescent to the conscious mind unless illumined by spirit. He says he had to go into what he called trance-like states. At one point he said, we in our language call this the conscious mind, which is the rational mind, and we call this, when spirit illumines us, the subconscious mind. Brahms said, we need to start calling it the superconscious. Isn't that amazing? This is in the late 1800s. But then he goes on to say what is so interesting for all of us. And I have my cheat sheet because these are all musical terms. But he says, of course, he says, a composer must have mastered the technique of composition, form, theory, harmony, counterpoint, instrumentation. He said, but any musical person can do that if he has the proper education. He just, like that, says, those are all the laws of music, but that's the easy part. The hard part comes when you learn, in essence, how to tap into truth and grace, how you sit long enough, quietly. And I'll tell you what else he said. He said, you don't just sit and ask God to give you a piece of music. And he quotes Mozart and Beethoven and Haydn and himself. He said, you have to sit and raise the energy up, he says these words, and have some idea of what you want to ask for. Get a feeling for where you want that music to go. This is exactly what Swami Kriyananda says to us over and over and over. You want to write a piece? Hold in your mind, what do you want the words to convey? What feeling do you want the music to convey? Offer that up and then listen for the answer. And here is Brahms. It was so beautiful to me hearing that he is saying exactly the same thing, that what we need to be great is love. We need to open our heart. I taught a class yesterday. Boy, that felt like a long time ago. But it was just yesterday on the prodigal son. Because so many times when I've been up here giving that talk, I think, who can talk about the prodigal son in 20 minutes? The parable, it's impossible. So we did for 3 hours. And it was really lovely. And let me think, because we wound up reading the Festival of Light as the second half of the class, because it is the story, it's told from the perspective of a bird, but it is the story of the prodigal son. The soul goes out, it's lost, it wants to hold on to everything, it forgets what it's supposed to be doing. Finally, it heeds the call, it surrenders, and it finds its way back to God, which is, in essence, what happens in that other story. But when we came to the part about the Om song that we sing, that we'll sing in just a little bit here, I read that song differently than I think I've ever heard it, because Om, which is the sound of God, which is the manifestation of that super consciousness, that love in the form of sound. And we say, as we sing, gone is our bondage. Gone is delusion. As soon as and only when we can enter into that state. The only thing that matters in this whole life is how much we can love God. Nothing else matters. We have to start from where we are. We need to take these abstractions, these words, these thoughts of omnipresence, divine consciousness, divine love, and we need to find ways in our life that we can make them real. We need to, as our reading says today, kindness is the outward manifestation of love. But let's start there. Let's just start being kind as often as we can, because by doing a lot of these manifesting the laws outwardly, in essence, we set into play certain vibrations. It's good to be kind. Kindness is not divine love, but it's on the way there. We set into a different vibration within ourselves that we can then locate, that we can tap into as we move more and more down the path toward our goal. I had an absolutely intuitive, a real inspiration when I was early on in medical school that spoke to this. I didn't know it then, but I remembered it yesterday. Medical school was hard. And the first 2 years of medical school, you do nothing but study basic sciences. It's 2 years of physiology, biochemistry. I mean, it's just the basic sciences, and it's a lot of basic sciences. I wondered for years, why do we have to know all this stuff? It's not like I'm out there now treating somebody with congestive heart failure, trying to remember all of the physical dynamics of the Starling curve. Who cares? Or the Krebs cycle in the liver. My role is to see, is this person in liver failure or not, what am I going to do about it? Later, I understood in many ways it was laying a foundation. I may never go back down to the foundation of the house, but it's important to have it there. It's what everything stands on. Maybe more than anything, it taught me discipline, because it was a lot of studying. But when you're studying, You're always focusing on what you don't know. And it got to be so anxiety-producing for me. I just couldn't bear it every night, trying to cram into my head everything I didn't know. So I had an inspiration. I said, every night of 4 to 6 hours of studying, I'll take 2 15-minute breaks, and I will announce everything I know. So that's what I did. I would walk around the house saying, I love the Starling curve. I know what happens when myocardial fibers stretch too far and the heart can no longer work the way, and sodium is running out of the cell when it's supposed, and I would just announce all of that. My husband was a little disconcerted by it, but other than that, you know, it was an extraordinary thing for me to do because it was raising my energy. It was giving me magnetism, inspiration. It was saying yes. It was doing exactly, taking me on my way to becoming everything I could be, which years later manifested in the art of medicine. Not the rules of medicine. I don't remember any of that. Really, I don't remember any of it. I had to just, 30 seconds ago, make up some lines about the Starling curve. It does have to do with myocardial fibers and stretching, but just in case there's any doctors here or listening. But the point is, that's not where I go. But what I got out of it is that ability to affirm what I knew, to start leaning into being, becoming all that I could be. Hey, I can learn this stuff. I even know a lot of it already. I may not drift off into samadhi every day when I sit and meditate, but I can really treat people well with consciousness. You see, it takes energy to do this. We have to bring ourselves to do it. It's not going to happen if we're passive. It's not going to happen if I had only, as a young child, because I insisted that my parents keep a close to Orthodox Jewish home, and if it wasn't good enough for me, I threatened, and several times did, to run away to my grandmother's house. We will obey the law. I was looking for something. I was desperate for something. I was a little confused myself. If I don't eat milk with meat, will God come to me? You see, it's not that it's bad to not eat milk with meat. And it's not that I didn't have to go through 2 years of basic science. It's that we can't confuse the path with the goal. And the goal we get to by little bit, changing abstractions into realities in our life that touch our heart. We chant, we pronam in front of our altar, and maybe at some point even to each other. I have a practice in my life every night of my life, every single night of my life. The last thing I do before I go to sleep is I ask God to wrap his arms around me and to hold me as I fall asleep. Give me a hug, I say. You hold me. I want to fall asleep with you, feeling the truth, really, that I'm surrounded by you, that I am you. I want to be that close. Find your own habits. Years ago, a friend of mine sent me a little Buddha that could sit on my computer. It's this little rubber Buddha. Anything we can do, anything that takes us, it's changing our inner vibration. It's awakening our memory, smriti, remembering the essence of who we really are, which is not these minds, as Brahm said, not something that's limited there like that. We can't get there from here. It is virtually impossible. We have to transcend that, and we do that through the heart, through love, through devotion. We start with kindness, with generosity, And eventually, we find our way there. Master says, God loves mental whispers. This is all Master now. God loves mental whispers. You are never so busy that you cannot mentally whisper your devotion to him, are you? This is what I do all the time, he says. There's no possible excuse for not talking to him inwardly. That is real bhakti yoga that you can practice anywhere, all the time. And the more you practice, the nearer he will be.